And welcome back to Power Lunch. I'm Brian Sullivan in Washington, D.C. We're pleased to be joined now by Scott Walker, Governor of Wisconsin. Governor Walker, thank you very much for joining CNBC. We appreciate it, sir. Maybe no state is as interesting as yours regarding the election. You went for Donald Trump. You've got a lot of manufacturers in the state of Wisconsin. So far, it's early. Have you liked what you've heard, and do you believe that we are going to get the change that we need to create the jobs that Wisconsin demanded at the election?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, last year we had more people employed in our state than ever before. Our year-over-year numbers for manufacturing are the top in the Midwest and one of the best in the country, and we're one of the most heavily dependent in manufacturing. So for us, it's really important when we look at some of the overreach, things like the costly power plant, as I call it, that the Obama administration did to overreach their authority through the EPA. Those sorts of things being reined in early on in this administration are incredibly important, probably even more than tax relief, although I want tax relief. Don't get me wrong, I want that. I want us to replace and reform health care going forward. But probably the #1 issue I hear from employers of any sort, particularly manufacturing, is rein in the out-of-control regulatory process in Washington, and this president's committed to doing it.
You know, what's interesting, too, about Wisconsin is that there's many manufacturers in your state who also manufacture not only in Milwaukee and the surrounding areas, but in Mexico and other places. So I can see where they may have literally a foot on both sides of the border adjustment tax fence. I'm sure you've talked to a lot of these business leaders. What do they want? What would they say would be the #1 thing they can get from where we're sitting right now to create jobs?
Well, certainly, companies like GE Healthcare, which has a huge base in Wisconsin, they would like that because they do business around the world, but they're one of our biggest exporters when it comes to medical devices and instruments. But we've got Harley-Davidson. The president mentioned that, as he has oftentimes the last few weeks, about how much it costs for them to ship into many countries versus importing motorcycles from other brands into the United States. But I think the #1 thing, beyond just the regulations I just mentioned, is lower the corporate tax rate, make it competitive with the rest of the industrialized world, and allow those American dollars to be repatriated. That allows not just the companies, but more importantly, those jobs to come back home, where more of our fellow Americans here in Wisconsin and across the country can go back to work.
What's the one thing you've heard that troubles you, or something you have not heard enough of, Governor, that you would like to hear more of?
Oh, I just like to hear, not that it troubles me. I'm excited. I heard from Scott Pruitt, the new administrator at the EPA, the other day. I've heard from others along the way, but I just want to keep hearing more about how they're going to rein in regulations. I think about 3/4 of all the regulations the federal government involved in, they could get rid of or send back to the states and the people, and we'd be much better off. We're more effective, we're more efficient, we're more accountable in the states. The more I hear about sending responsibilities and resources, not just in Medicaid, but in transportation, in infrastructure, environmental protection, energy, workforce investment, all those areas, the more you send it back to the people via the states, the better off we'll all be.
So you're not at the federal level, though you did try, but there is so much skepticism about whether or not President Trump can get his agenda through. The Senate doesn't like this. There's an internal war going on with the Republican Party, etc. You do make legislation or sausage at the state level. What do you say to the skepticism that is out there? Are you convinced that the agenda that he has set out can be accomplished?
Absolutely. I mean, the key, we learned here in Wisconsin, like I said, we have more people employed last year than ever before. Our cumulative tax cuts with my most recent budget will exceed $8 billion over 8 years. Our schools are some of the best in the country. Our healthcare systems are some of the best. We are working and winning here in Wisconsin. But part of the key to that was even a few years ago when there were hundreds of thousands of protesters here and in our capital and occupying the Capitol. That's right, the Occupy movement didn't start in Wall Street. It started right up the way here in Madison on my street. But we didn't back down. We listened to people. We were thoughtful and respectful, but along the way, we ultimately did the things that we said we were going to do. Instead of running away, we ran forward and ran through the pushback that we received. And our state, and most importantly, our citizens, are that much better off because of it. I think the same thing's true with the President and the House and the Senate. They clearly ran on an agenda. They laid out that agenda. The voters responded accordingly. And yeah, there's some pushback, just like there was here in Wisconsin. But I think the key is to be respectful and thoughtful, but continue to keep moving America forward, just like we have here and other governors and lawmakers have done across the country.
You mentioned Tyler Mathisen here, Governor, and thanks for being with us. You mentioned $8 billion in cumulative tax cuts. What have you had to cut by way of costs or services for the people of Wisconsin to keep your budget in balance? How have you pulled that one?
Well, the biggest change we made back when we first came in after our first election was we changed collective bargaining. It was something at a local official. I could see the waste, fraud, and abuse that often happened in not only state government but local government. So we changed the way we do bargaining with public employees in the state of Wisconsin. We now put the power back in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers instead of the elite, the handful of big government union leaders that in the past had dictated both state and local government. Since then, that saved us more than $5 billion by a number of independent reports. And because of our reforms, because of those things we did years ago, combined with the reforms to empower the people, the employers of our states, to create more jobs, higher wages, and more prosperity, we now have what's called a reform dividend in this state, and we're investing it to the highest amount ever we put, for example, in the K-12 schools and our technical colleges to meet our workforce needs.
Governor, I don't know if you know this, I am a Wisconsin taxpayer. I spend some of my summers up there. So I want you to roll back regulations, but keep the water clean, please. But before we go, I want to ask you, because I personally know people that voted Democrat for 20, 30 years and went for Trump, mostly union folks. Do you believe that those voters who went to Trump in Kenosha County and others that had been voting Democrat for multiple elections, that they are now on the GOP's team full time? Or do you believe that Trump was a one-off? Have they moved permanently? Do you think the Democratic Party has lost them?
Well, I think that we need to, as elected officials and as candidates for future office, we need to earn those votes every single time. I don't think any vote, particularly those votes, are no way a given. But I do think if you look at the map here in Wisconsin, it's almost identical to my three elections, the election, the re-election, and the recall. The state, or the portions of the state and the counties and jurisdictions that I won 3 times are almost identical to what President Trump and President Pence won this last go-around. And I think it just shows that people are sick and tired of politicians, particularly in Washington, that say one thing and do another. They were looking for somebody to shake things up. We did it in Wisconsin. To keep earning their vote, Donald Trump, as the president, is going to have to deliver on his promises.
All right, Governor Scott Walker, do us a favor, bring the jobs back, but keep the waters clean as well. I think you can do both. Governor, thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us.